Welcome to Digital Learning Day, Tuesday, April 28th. Continuation of our discussion on climate. Today's topic will be Wisconsin's climate and Wisconsin's changing climate. Yesterday we did an overview of what climate is, an average of kind of weather conditions averaged out over 30 to 50 years. That's climate. It's not about being cold one day when it's supposed to be warm, that kind of stuff. It's averaged out over a long period of time. We looked at the different climate zones. We found out that Wisconsin is in the temperate zone. We have seasons, those kinds of things. We know that there are other climate zones as well, the polar zones near the poles, the tropical zones around the equator. We also found out that there are natural phenomena that can cause changing climate. For instance, volcanic eruptions can lead to a change in climate because of ash blocking sunlight or carbon dioxide trapping heat. The Earth changes. There's a wobble in the tilt of its axis, and so some years it can have a little bit more sunlight, and some years a little bit less direct sunlight, which can affect our climate. The sun puts out different amounts of radiation depending upon kind of an 11-year cycle. So there are some natural causes for a changing climate. But we finished up with the idea that humans in the last maybe say 50 years are really the driving force between what climate used to be and how climate has changed today. So today we're going to look at Wisconsin's climate. And as you can see on this on my screen, and I've shared this link with you, it's climatewisconsin.org. There's lots of great information here. These videos are very short, 3-4 minutes typically is all these videos will run, but they show specific examples of how a changing climate is affecting our state. All right. Now, there's one down here at the bottom that I want to start with, and it's temperature change. And on your iPad, you might have to do this in Photon. So go to Photon and then type in climatewisconsin.org, and then you can use these Flash Player applications that are here. But that bottom one is about a changing temperature. And so what the University of Wisconsin-Madison has done is they've gathered all of the temperature data that they can. Typically it goes back to about 1880, and then shown the trend at which our temperatures are changing, and then projected that out into the future. And so when we look at this, we can pick a city, and the closest one to us is Oshkosh. So I'm going to hover over that. And I'll raise it up a little bit here. And you can see that the average temperature in Oshkosh, so this is for the entire year, all 365 days, what was the temperature? Add them all up, divide by 365, that's the answer. 44.2 degrees in Oshkosh in 1960. In the decade of the 60s, so it's a 10-year average, all right? Compare that to 2020 in this decade, and you can see that the average temperature is up 4 degrees. Now, for some of us, like me, I don't really care for winter all that much. Is this a terrible thing for me? Not necessarily, but it does have an impact on lots and lots of things, which we'll talk about today. What I want to do then is I want to fast forward, let's say the decade of the 2040s. So now you're going to be, early 30s, maybe a family and a career and all that kind of stuff. And what you can see then in that decade is projected to be almost 6 degrees warmer than it was in the 1960s. It's got an impact on plants, it's going to have an impact on animals, and it's going to have an impact on your life. This is also, it goes out further. So I'll go, let's see, 2060. So you're going to be like 50 something. Man, you're going to be old and crusty at that time. And the average temperature is projected to be now 8 degrees warmer than it was 100 years ago. Imagine the kinds of impacts that that's going to have. Now I'm going to fast forward another 2090. You're going to be like 80 something year old grannies and grandpies. And the average temperature between 1960 and 2090 is projected to go up on the order of 12 to 13 degrees. That's a lot. 12 to 13 degrees warmer than it was maybe when your grandparents were young. So, our changing climate here in Wisconsin, temperature wise, is going to have dramatic effects. All right. Now, what you can do is you can look at how these temperatures that are projected, kind of what climate they're like right now. And so when we do that on a US map, basically the temperatures that we see here are going to be more like southern Illinois than Wisconsin. So we're going to have far less snow, which is going to be less moisture in the soil for crops. And we're going to have warmer temperatures. Now, here's kind of a weird thing about climate change, especially for places like Wisconsin. This change in temperature almost exclusive. Well, I'm going to say it this way, and this is going to sound weird, and then I'll explain it. We are not really getting any warmer here in Wisconsin. We're getting less cold. Let that sink in a little bit. We're not getting warmer in Wisconsin. We're getting less cold. What that means is our summers, we're not really noticing much change at all here in our temperatures in Wisconsin in the summer. Where we're noticing the change is in the winter. It's not getting as cold in the winters. And there's other evidence that helps to show that, which I will show you here shortly. But we know that Wisconsin's winters are important for tourism and for ice fishing and sturgeon spearing and all kinds of kind of cultural things that we have here in Wisconsin, which are threatened by these less cold winters. All right. Now I'm going to go to another of these sites on that page that I sent you, and that one is over here with ice cover. And here's some more evidence of how this less cold is showing up here in Wisconsin. These are the two main lakes in Madison, Lake Mendota and Lake Monona. We'll pick either of them. How about Lake Monona today? And what they've done since the 1850s is they have recorded how many ice days there are. How many days is the lake covered in ice? And those numbers are illustrated on this graph. In 1855, there were 118 days that the lake was covered in ice. And you can see every year, this one only had 62 days of ice. The couple of years later, it had 160 days of ice. So something that's very easy data to collect. You don't need any special equipment. You just need observation. Is there ice on the lake or isn't there? Now, when we look at the 10 longest seasons, you can see that all of them occurred before 1910. The 10 longest seasons of ice, the most days with ice on, all happened before 1910. When we look at the 10 shortest seasons, we can see that they're spread out a little bit more. One here in 1877, 1931, 1965. But what you can see is a lot of days here, starting in the late 1990s and moving towards today, where we have the shortest number of days of ice on the lake. When you take all of this data and you figure out the average trend and you look, there are 34 fewer days of ice today on Lake Monona than there was in the mid 1850s. So, what does that mean? Well, it means our winters on average are getting warmer. It means that people have more than a month less time that they can ice fish. Maybe, I suppose, back in the day they had sled dogs and carriages, and now we got snowmobiles and those kinds of things. But 34 fewer days of ice on the lake. This is a great data point. Lake Mendota, the other lake that's there, is very similar. It's not exactly the same, but you can see the 10 longest seasons again are there. The 10 shortest seasons are there. The trend on Lake Mendota is 31 fewer days of ice. So we've got some really great data points that help to illustrate how we're having less cold winters here in Wisconsin. Now, I want to very briefly go back over a couple of these things. I'm not going to show you the videos. I would really love it if you picked one or two of these that you care most about. Watch the short videos and hear specifically how climate changing in Wisconsin is affecting these industries. By the way, there's lots of jobs associated with many of these, lots of money that's generated for the state of Wisconsin for many of these. So I'm just going to go over them very briefly, and then hopefully you choose a couple to watch. So sugaring is the collection of maple syrup, which is going on, probably going on right now. Maybe it's towards the end of the sugaring season. Maple trees, they're tapped, and when it warms up above 32 degrees during the day, the sap goes from the roots up towards the branches of the tree, and then as it cools at night, that sap sinks back down towards the roots, and they put little taps in there that collect this. Basically, because we have less cold nights in the spring, there's less ability to collect the sap from these maple trees, and so the sugaring industry is really struggling because there's less sap to collect. Those are jobs. Those are money, right? Phenology. Phenology is not an industry. It's an observation. Basically, you keep track of when various plants and animals arrive or they bloom. And what they've found is that many things in Wisconsin, the birds are coming back sooner, the bears are waking up earlier. And because of that, the food sources for some of these animals specifically might not be available. They came back too soon and the food isn't there for them. When the robins come back and they're typically trying to eat worms, well, if it's still frozen ground, those worms aren't going to come up to be, food for the robins, those kinds of things. So phenology, keeping track of plants and animals and when they are coming back to the state. Fly fishing, warmer temperatures, trout like cold water, fast moving water, oxygenated water, and as it warms, there's less water that's suitable for trout. Over $1 billion a year is spent in the state of Wisconsin due to fly fishing. If fly fishing goes away, that's $1 billion less that our state tourism will get together. Farming, hugely important. Our farmers are already faced with enough difficulties, but warming temperatures is a double-edged sword. Or actually, I don't know if that's right. There's some positives. Longer growing seasons. People can grow crops later into the year, start earlier in the spring. That part of it's great. However, those warm temperatures also are bringing in some invasive species that they haven't had to deal with before. They can bring in drought, stronger storms that ruin crops. So the farming industry is under some pretty severe challenges due to the changing climate in Wisconsin. Forestry, invasive species. We've got lots of trees around North Fond du Lac and Fond du Lac. The ash trees lately have been cut down because of the emerald ash borer. It's an insect that is passed from one ash tree to the next. They munch on them and they kill them. And we didn't have that problem when we had colder winters. And there are other examples of that in the forestry industry here in Wisconsin. I'm going to skip just a couple here. The Birkebeiner is a cross-country ski race in Hayward, Wisconsin, held every year. They've actually had to cancel it in the last couple of years. They ran it this year, but before that it had to be canceled a year or two. In the early 2010s, there was no snow. They couldn't have the cross-country ski race up in Hayward. It cost the city of Hayward upwards of $25 million that it lost out on because of this one race had to be canceled. And you can see that there are other examples as well. So the bottom line is the changing climate here in Wisconsin has a direct impact on businesses, industries, jobs, and money for the state of Wisconsin. This is a real issue, and it's something that in your lifetime is only going to get more complicated, and it's going to need some answers from people like you to help figure out how we're going to change, how we're going to adapt to our changing climate. So, with that said, remember, there is a short quiz that goes along with our lesson today. I'm going to try to make it kind of the great big ideas for the day. The quiz will be fairly short. Make sure you do that. That's how we know that you passed for the week, is by doing my quizzes and doing them well. If you have any questions, email me, Google Hangout, Google Meet. You know how to get a hold of me. If you need my help, I am here for you. All right? So please utilize me. And with that, that is going to be about all for the day. Tomorrow, we're going to look at a more global view of changing climate and how we're managing that. So, with that said, I will talk to you tomorrow.